Panic mode. Freeland throws EB under the bus amid mounting political backlash. The political climate in Canada has taken a sharp turn as the dust settles from the April 28 snap federal election that handed Mark Carney the reins of leadership. Though the House of Commons is on break and many Canadians are shifting into summer mode, the headlines aren't taking a vacation. In fact, the noise is only getting louder. Two major stories are now colliding in public discourse, painting a picture of a government at odds with its own promises and struggling to contain a rapidly growing backlash. At the heart of it all, a billion-dollar ferry contract handed to China and a contested denial from Elections Canada about foreign interference in the election. The controversy began when it was revealed that 4 new ferries for BC Ferries would not be built in Canada, but in China. British Columbia's Premier David Eby approved the contract, citing urgency and backlog in local shipyards. But what turned this into a national scandal was the funding source: $1 billion in low-interest federal loans provided through the Canada Infrastructure Bank. Many Canadians were stunned to learn that taxpayer money earmarked for domestic infrastructure projects was being used to finance jobs and industrial growth in a country known for its hostile trade policies and mounting tensions with Canada. The optics couldn't be worse. While Canadian workers continue to face layoffs and underemployment, public funds are supporting Chinese shipbuilding. Transport Minister Chrystia Freeland, already under pressure following her demotion from Finance Minister, jumped into damage control mode. She sent a strongly worded letter to Premier Eby, demanding assurances that no federal funding would support the foreign procurement of ferries. Her tone was firm, her language decisive, but it came too late. The contract had already been signed, the money already committed. Freeland's letter read more like an effort to save face than a genuine attempt to stop the deal. For many observers, her reaction felt scripted, calculated, a way to distance herself from a decision that had already gone public and turned politically radioactive. Premier Eby, for his part, maintained that he had no other option. He argued that local shipyards were overloaded, timelines were tight, and the province couldn't afford delays. He tried to present the decision as pragmatic rather than political. But the timing, so soon after a federal election where Canada First rhetoric was front and center, made it impossible to avoid criticism. The decision to bypass Canadian shipyards contradicted everything voters had just been told. The gap between political slogans and policy decisions became glaringly obvious, and Canadians were left wondering whether any of the promises made on the campaign trail actually meant anything. To make matters worse, Freeland's letter conveniently referenced past federal support for BC Ferries, including a smaller $75 million grant, but failed to address the central issue: the $1 billion loan at well below market interest rates. That loan, ultimately, is what allowed this project to move forward in China. While the Infrastructure Bank claimed it wasn't involved in selecting the supplier, it's hard to believe the government didn't anticipate how the funds would be used. The idea that this decision flew under the radar until it hit the news doesn't pass the smell test. Someone knew, and likely approved, every step of the process. The situation has exposed cracks in the foundation of the new Liberal government. While voters were told that Canadian jobs and industries would be a top priority, this single contract has become a symbol of broken promises. The backlash isn't just about ferries, it's about trust. When leaders campaign on national pride, manufacturing, and domestic investment, but act in ways that benefit foreign economies, it sends a message that political convenience still trumps principle. That message is landing hard, especially in regions that depend on industrial jobs and were counting on revitalized investment. And just as that firestorm was gaining momentum, another headline landed, this time from Elections Canada. Commissioner Caroline Simard released a statement concluding that there was no evidence of foreign interference affecting the results of the April 28 federal election. On paper, that should be good news. But instead of calming nerves, it raised more questions. Simard noted her office received over 16,000 complaints, more than 7 times the usual volume, but claimed none of the issues were serious enough to change the outcome of the vote. To many Canadians, that sounded suspiciously dismissive, especially given how many security experts had raised alarms about potential interference leading up to the election. The problem wasn't just the conclusion, it was the narrow lens through which it was reached. The commissioner's report focused on black and white violations of the Elections Act. But what about the gray areas? What about the use of artificial intelligence to generate deepfakes, the coordinated messaging campaigns by third parties, or the disproportionate media coverage targeting specific candidates? These are not the kinds of interference that can be measured on a spreadsheet. They live in the culture, the tone, the way narratives are built and circulated. Yet the Commission's response seemed uninterested in any of that nuance. This left many Canadians frustrated. During the election, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre was repeatedly attacked over long-settled issues like his security clearance, while Mark Carney's financial entanglements were barely mentioned. It's not that voters expect every story to get equal airtime, but the imbalance was obvious. Media coverage shaped perceptions in ways that felt intentional. Whether or not this was coordinated foreign interference, it certainly impacted the public's understanding of who was trustworthy and who wasn't. And none of that is reflected in the official report. What makes this even harder to accept is the government's long-standing pattern of invoking the threat of foreign interference when it suits them politically. In past years, Liberals spoke loudly about threats from China and other foreign actors, especially when trying to justify new legislation or expanded surveillance powers. But when the possibility of interference touches their own election or benefits their preferred narratives, suddenly the urgency disappears. It's this double standard that erodes public faith, not just in the election system, but in governance as a whole. Meanwhile, the new Prime Minister faces a credibility test just weeks into his mandate. Mark Carney's election was framed as a reset, a chance to rebuild public trust and realign national priorities. But the ferry contract and the way it's been handled cuts directly against that message. The disjointed responses from Freeland and EB, the lack of coordination, and the absence of accountability have only made things worse. Carney has not publicly addressed the issue in depth, leaving a leadership vacuum at a moment when clarity is needed most. As summer unfolds, many Canadians will turn their attention to family, vacations, and everyday life. But the unresolved questions hanging over this ferry deal and the election process won't simply fade away. These aren't just minor policy hiccups, they're symbols of a broader dysfunction. Canadians are watching, and even if the political class hopes the outrage will cool down by fall, that may prove to be a serious miscalculation. The reality is this: if leaders truly want to earn public trust, they can't afford to hide behind vague reports and reactive press releases. They need to be transparent, consistent, and willing to take responsibility for the decisions made under their watch. Otherwise, Canadians will continue to question not just individual policies, but the integrity of the entire system.